I'm not pulling out of the driveway. We all know what that means. It's time for the Drive to Work Coronavirus Edition. Okay, so today I'm going to take a look at the color pie of Planar Chaos. Okay, so many years ago, we made a set where it was part of the time spiral block. Time spiral was the past, future sight was the future, and I was trying to figure out how to make Planar Chaos the present. But the present is a hard concept since all sets are the present. And so we came into this idea of an alternate reality. So one of the big concepts behind it was, what if magic were a little different? And the main thing we changed is we said, well, what if the colors all have the same philosophies, but they've been represented mechanically a little bit differently? And so we did that. We made a set in which the color pie was different than the normal color pie. This has caused all sorts of confusion because some of the things we did there, we would later go on to do. Some of them, we definitely were experimenting a little bit. So some of them actually became real, if you will. But some of them was us trying something that we never went back to. That was just experimenting with something. And it's not really what the color pie is. It's this alternate version that we've never done, since we did it here. So anyway, I thought I'd walk through the color pie today and talk about what we did and how we moved things and why we moved things, and then talk a little bit about what ended up going in that direction and what didn't. Okay, so first I'm going to talk about the creature mechanics. Some of these at the time were named and some of them were not named, interestingly, although many of them were later named. Okay, so first up we have fear. So for those who don't remember, fear was a mechanic that, it first showed up in alpha on a card called Fear. It wasn't named Fear for a while, and Fear is a weird name for it anyway. But it says this creature can't be blocked except by artifact creatures and red creatures. It's not red creatures, or black creatures. Normal Fear is right. You can only be blocked by artifact creatures or black creatures. In Planar Chaos, we said, well, what if Fear, instead of being a black thing, was a red thing? So the idea is, but we did change it, so it can only be blocked by artifact creatures or red creatures. Interestingly, I think the reason we did that was, red has, a lot of panic effects. It can affect emotions. Well, what if this represented you the reason you're not blockable is you're manipulating their emotions, but, maybe fellow red mages, it's harder to manipulate their emotions than everybody else. And I guess, artifact creatures don't have emotions. But anyway, interestingly, fear would later become intimidate, and intimidate was exactly this, where we said, well, let's just make fear let's apply it to all colors. And so intimidate just said I can't be blocked by artifact creatures or my color, whatever my color is. And interestingly, we put intimidate in black and red. So this is very much us sort of hinting at where we would go. Next up, First Strike. So First Strike is normally in white and red. In Planar Chaos, we moved into black. Now, black has always been tertiary in First Strike. It showed up actually in alpha on Black Knight, and occasionally on, usually it's on Knights. We do it. Every once in a while we do it on black. The idea here is, what if just that was, what if First Strike, in red and white, it's more like prowess, right? The reason that I hit you first is I'm a better fighter than you. I'm well, maybe in black, it's a little more like I'm not so honorable in how I fight, and I get that cheap shot in fast before you realize what's going on. First Strike has kind of stayed tertiary in black, so this is something that we did in Planar Chaos. We do occasionally, but it hasn't really changed since then. Flying, normally flying was primary blue, and we decided in Planar Chaos, really what we did is not so much that we changed what flying was. We kind of need flying to exist in the colors that existed. Really what we did is we shifted kind of the color that was worse at flying from green to red. And so we did let green have some flying in Planar Chaos, and green normally doesn't get much flying. Once again, flying's tertiary in green. Every once in a while, when it really makes sense, there's a cycle of dragons or something, green gets flying every once in a blue moon. But here we gave green a little bit more. So we, instead of blue being number one, we made everybody but red kind of equally. And really what that meant was blue, white, and black that normally get flying had it, but green had flying where a lot of times it doesn't. Next up, haste. So haste at the time was just in red, and so we changed it to green. Haha. And I think we were playing with the idea of Part of the way we tend to play haste is you're so focused that you're not, summoning sickness doesn't disorient you. And we're like, okay, green could do that as well as red. Interestingly, after this, we ended up putting haste secondary in black, and then we put haste tertiary in green. And then recently, a couple years ago, we just said, green can be secondary in haste. So green is the number 2. Black still has its secondary, but not as much as green. So green is kind of number 2 at it, and black's number 3. So this is us definitely hinting at the future. Not that we always knew the future, but us hinting at what made sense, and that turned out to be the future. Regeneration, which is something we did in black and green, we did in white. I think white has a lot of defensive qualities to it, and white had a lot of healing flavor. So if you think of regeneration as healing, which is how we flavor it in green, it makes just as much sense in white. And in some ways we've got rid of regeneration. Instead, we do temporary indestructible. And white is one of the colors that does indestructible. Black is more the temporary indestructible color than white, but it is something white can do. So this is us, it's playing in space that we still play with a little bit. Next up, it's funny, at the time, we just called this Spirit Link. We now know as Life Link. And Life Link was thought as being a white thing. So in this set, we put it in black. Interestingly, the very first creature that ever had the Life Link ability was in Arabian Nights on a black card. El Hajjaj, I think it was called. So the flavor here was, hey, Spirit Link has a lot of similar flavor to draining life. What if we put it in black? Interestingly, in Future Sight, which would be the next set, we would keyword this ability, and we put Lifelink in black. So in some ways, this is us teasing of something that we'd pay off right away, which is, what if it were black? And then the next set is, it's black. So, but I guess we were just playing around with something that we knew we were going to introduce. Trample. So Trample at the time was a green. It's still a green. It's primary in green. Here we changed it to red. And the idea being that, red is probably second most in size, and it has an aggressive quality that makes sense with Trample. Not ironically, but this is another case where we would later go on to make red secondary in Trample. So red gets Trample all the time now. So, this isn't such a weird thing. Next, what we at a time called untargetability, we now would probably call hexproof. At the time, untargetability was more like shroud. Nobody can target me. So I think when we first made the card, at the time, blue and green were kind of where hexproof type spells went, and we put it in white. It is interesting that hexproof, which is sort of the modern day, or ward, I guess it's a better question. Ward, which is kind of the modern day, and hexproof as well. Hexproof still is in green and blue, but we have started putting ward in white. And so the idea of white having protection qualities to keep it getting targeted is plenty flavorful in white. Next, Vigilance. So Vigilance at the time was in white. We decided to put it in blue in Planar Chaos. And the idea was blue had Vigilance really early on. There was a card, I think, in Legends where it had Vigilance. And blue has the ability to untap itself. It can have creatures that can untap itself. So Vigilance isn't that far away from untapping yourself. Interestingly, in Future Sight, we did keyword, Vigilance wasn't keyword. Vigilance was already keyworded. But in Future Sight, we started talking about, do we want to branch out what could have certain abilities? And Vigilance, we ended up making secondary in green. But very recently, although it's not in cards yet, but I talked about this in my Color Pie, the Mechanical Color Pie article. We are currently putting blue, Vigilance into blue as secondary. So both green and blue will keep Vigilance secondary. White will have it primary. But we are letting blue have some access to Vigilance. It's something play design felt it needed. Like I said, blue can untap itself, so it wasn't that far away from having Vigilance. But anyway, so this idea of blue having Vigilance, once again, us teasing something that would come to be. Finally, what we of the creature keywords, what we called Web at the time, which now we would call Reach, normally was a green thing. We moved it to red. So the idea at the time was we shifted around so that instead of green being the weak at flying color, red was the weakest at flying color. And then to supplement that, we gave red reach. So kind of what we did is we exchanged red and green, where red didn't have flying but had reach, and green had a little bit of flying. So those two colors were sort of swapped. We do, interestingly, do reach. Red is secondary in reach. We do occasionally do reach in red. So it's interesting to note, of all the abilities, just a quick recap here. Fear, which now is menace. So fear got replaced by menace. Menace is core in black and red. So red does have that ability. First strike still red and white, so black is tertiary, but we did not move there. Haste is now primary red, secondary green, and tertiary, or not tertiary, secondary black. But green is now doing that. Regeneration has gone away. Spirit Link is now white and black. Life Link is now white and black. Trample is now red and green. We have various untargeted abilities like Ward, so white does have access to untargeted abilities, some kinds of untargeted ability. Vigilance is now in blue. Reach now is secondary in red. So it's interesting that a lot of what we did on the creature keywords would come to pass. Because one of the things that was interesting at the time was, early on in Magic, we really put creature keywords in one color. Like, black is fear, vigilance is white, haste is red. And what we learned over time was it was just more valuable to have keywords in more colors. It just gave us more flexibility to do more designs. And we made sure it's not in every color. With a few exceptions like flying or flash, really 3 is where we cap. Like 3 colors will do something, and usually we won't let the other 2 do it, just so it feels like it's means something in those colors. And even if it's in 3 colors, usually there's a primary and some secondaries that there's some ranking to how often they do it. But it is interesting, as we talk about all the creature keywords, how almost all of them, like maybe not First Strike, but almost all of them, and interestingly there, First Strike was already in 2 colors. It was the one that was already in 2 colors. So we didn't really need the other color, but it is neat to talk about how many of these did eventually go there. Okay, but now we get to the half that was a little more us pushing in areas that we didn't follow up on, which is talking about spell abilities. Okay, so first up is what we'll call bounce, returning a creature from the battlefield to its owner's hand. So what we did something interesting on bounce in Planar Chaos is we said, let's chop it up. What if, instead of bounce being one color's thing, what if it was 2 colors? What if white was defensive bounce, meaning you could bounce your own stuff, and red was offensive bounce? So the idea we liked in white was, well, what if white used it protectively? What if white bounce was a way to sort of save its creatures, because white's very defensive? And what if red used bounce as sort of a means of short-term fixing of problems, right? Red is all about the short-term answer. It doesn't think long-term. So we're like, okay, it sort of makes some sense philosophically makes some sense, right? Red's trying to solve the problem now, not worrying about tomorrow. And bouncing things is very much worrying about it now. Like, it's going to come back. It's not a long-term answer. So philosophically, we thought it made a lot of sense. So interestingly, I just said that not a lot of the spell things moved, but this one did. While blue, obviously, bounce is still in blue. That hasn't changed. We have started doing defensive bounce in white. We do let white bounce your own stuff. So that part that we were experimenting with did become part of Magic. Red doing aggressive bounce, what we ended up finding out was it was just too synergistic with red. One of red's things is that I'm the aggro color and I'm trying to hit you and I'm trying to just get things out of my way. Like, red's trying to do as much damage as fast as possible. And that tempo-based things are just better in red than they are in other places. Blue likes tempo, but blue's a slower-based deck. So blue's tempo is about getting to a state of control, not about winning quickly. And so what we found was red bounce was just, it was a little bit too synergistic with what red did. Philosophically, it made a lot of sense, right? It made sense that red did it, philosophically, but it mechanically didn't work well. And that's another thing to remember is, it's not hard to find a way to flavor something. The color pie is pretty flavorful, and there's a lot of flexibility to flavor. But fundamentally, things have to work mechanically, or else, it doesn't work out. Okay, card drawing. Card drawing. Here's one of the ones we went a little off. So card drawing traditionally is in blue. We use it in blue to represent knowledge. I'm gaining knowledge. But we said, okay, what if instead we put it in green? Green is, green and black are secondary in card drawing. Normally, green card drawing is tied to its creatures. For a while, it was also tied to land. We stopped doing that just because it made it a little too easy to draw things. But anyway, we're like, okay, what if card drawing represented growth rather than represented knowledge? And green's all about growth. And like I said, green was number 2 but it turns out that green's weakness is its over-reliance on its creatures, or one of its weaknesses. And like tying its card drawing as well as its creature destruction to creatures really says, hey, green starts having problems if it doesn't have creatures. It has trouble with card flow. It has trouble with answers. And so it really says, okay, green really is over-reliant on its creatures. And so giving card drawing to green without its creatures just made it too good. And you can tell, like, the card we did card drawing on, Harmonize, is just a staple in Commander. Like it's a break, really. It's not something like what we learned is we let green. This is one of the lessons of Planar Chaos is we're like, oh, well, green's secondary in card drawing. We'll just change this one aspect. But like, no. That one aspect, that restriction, that creature restriction, is a big point of green being what it is. And so this is a good example where we were trying to flavor something, and flavor-wise made sense, but it kind of broke things a little bit, and to let green do something that really was problematic for green. Next, counterspells. So we did something interesting in counterspells, which was we didn't take it out of blue because it was so iconic to blue. What we did instead was we added it to a second color, and that color was white. Basically the idea was, look, white does taxing, so white should be able to do counterspells that tax. I think Mana Tithe, for example, was in the set. So, what is that called? It's spend 1 mana, they have to pay 1 or it gets countered. Force Spike is the blue version of the card. And we also did we tried to do Memory Lapse. I think we later did Memory Lapse in a different set. The idea that I'm countering it, but I'm putting it back in your hand. So I'm not forever stopping it, I'm just temporarily stopping it. Felt like a very delay thing. Interestingly, I believe white can and is capable, color pie wise, of doing both those things right now, outside of Planar Chaos. The play design isn't real fond of it, and so it's become this thing where I think white can do it color pie wise. Like, it doesn't really break anything color pie wise, but counterspells have sort of enough issues that just spreading out counterspells to second color is decided. Play design really didn't want to do that, so we haven't done it. I do think it's the kind of thing from time to time we can sort of dip our toe in, but it's not something we're really dedicating ourselves to doing. Next, damage prevention. So this was something that was white, stopping damage. We ended up putting it in green. The reason there is that green has a strong flavor of healing. And we're like, okay, well, if green can gain life, how horrible is it if we let green stop damage prevention? Like healing leaves was healing salve, right? You can either stop damage or gain life. And we're like, okay, if we're going to let you gain life, if we prevent damage. Now, this does let you save creatures, but green can, like, giant growth creatures, and green can hexproof creatures. Like, green has ways to sort of already save its creatures from stuff. So, now what it turned out what really turned out in this is we've moved away from doing damage prevention all that much. It just slows the game down, and it's something we do from time to time. It's not something that needs to be in a second color. So while green makes some thematic sense and mechanically it's fine, we just don't, we barely do it in white these days. So I do think green would be where we went if it's not in white. It's just not really necessary to do that. Next, deflection. So the changing of a spell. Normally we do that in red or blue. But we decided, we decided there's kind of a mean quality to redirecting, and so we decided to do in black. That black definitely does a decent amount of manipulation, and so we decided to let black do that. This is another one of those things where, in general, part of keeping the color pie unique and different is making sure that each color does something that's unique. And so on creature abilities, we're willing to stretch a little more. A lot of them are on, a bunch are on 2, some are on 3. like a few like flying show up on 4, but the idea is there's a lot of creatures we have to make. The spell effects usually there's not as many of them as we need to use, and so we want to be careful. Like, how often do we use deflection? Like maybe once, twice in a year. I mean, like, we don't do lots of deflection effects, so like the fact that 2 colors already have deflection really means the black just doesn't need it, and it just fits better in red and blue. So we put it here in black, and it's kind of a little out of place for where we'd want it to be. Next, dehydration effect. So that is an aura that keeps things from untapping. It's something we do in blue. We need answers in blue, especially in limited to creatures. And dehydration is kind of blue's limited answer to creatures that I can put on a creature and it sort of locks it down so it can't attack. Often it'll also tap it when it puts it down. So we ended up putting in black. I mean, black had paralyzed in alpha, and the idea of like I'm draining your energy, or I'm like the reason you like blue is sort of like I'm freezing you or I'm tiring you out. Black could just sort of be fatigue was sort of the idea. So anyway, it made some sense in black. I mean, black doesn't really need this effect. The reason why you really haven't seen this in black is black can kind of just kill things. So like why do something that maybe can be answered? So black doesn't do a lot of temporary answers. White's more king of like, I answered it now, but maybe you've answered my answer. Black is just like, you know what I'd rather do? I'd rather just kill the creature. And so, and dehydration is a pretty important part of blue. Blue doesn't have lots of good answers in limited for creature answers. I mean, it can counter things and bounce things and stuff, but it is, it's probably blue's number one sort of permanent answer in limited. Next, discard. Okay, so discard is a black ability. It's something that's pretty core to black. We moved it in Planar Chaos to blue. The idea being blue is the other mental color that, interacts with the brain. Like, it mills you. It can lobotomy you. It can extract you, take a card out of your... Although black does more extract than blue. But blue can definitely mess with the other player, their mental state. And we're like, okay, I guess it makes sense. Blue is like probably if black's like the most likely to do black's number one primary in discard. Blue is like, I'll call it tertiary because it's so far away from black that I wouldn't call it secondary. Usually when blue's doing discard, it's like I make you draw and discard cards or something. Like I'm making you sort of filter cards. Blue doesn't do much straight up discarding. And this set's one of the few places where it just did a straight up discard spell. Thematically makes some sense. Blue's kind of has counterspells and discard play in similar space in the sense that I can preactively answer things before there are threats on the board. And so there really hasn't been and then discard is like a counterspelling. We want it in the game. It has function in the game. There's some flavor there. It's not particularly fun in large volume, and so we really don't want it in a second color, so we've sort of just kept it black. Next, gating. So gating it's a nickname, is the idea of when a creature enters the battlefield, I need to unsummon another creature. And this is something that we made a white thing, saying that it's something that wasn't even a staple ability. But we decided in Planar Chaos that what if white did this a little more? And it ended up being something that did stick around. The idea of white creatures when they enter the battlefield, you have to return another creature, is a means we've let white use its resources of small creatures as a tool. Oh, I'll play a 1-drop, and then I play something that's bigger than it should be, and I can return my 1-drop to my hand, but it's easier to play again because it's so small and cheap. So this is something that, interestingly, we have moved into the color. Next, giant growth. So just boosting power and toughness. Normally it's a green thing. We made it a red thing here. The idea that red is a combat color and, we like red sort of surprising things in combat. It made a lot of sense. In fact, it's funny. We essentially have let red have those kind of effects. Usually the rule of thumb now is that power is greater than toughness, just to give it a feel that's a little bit different. Green's obviously primary in it, but we have made red, I guess, secondary, although we don't use it tons in red. Red will do +N+O a lot, but we've now let it to do more, plus n minus 1, plus n minus 2. We've done a little bit more of that type of stuff. Okay, next, mass creature destruction. Probably one of the most iconic of the alternate reality cards is Damnation. White, basically, Wrath of God had been sort of like, white had been primary in just destroy all creatures. Black and red both have some ability to do it. Red can do lots of damage, and black can kill all creatures. Usually black will do stuff like minus X, minus minus N to all creatures, or make players sacrifice the creatures. But this is something black can do and has done. It is primary in white. But it is like, this is one of those things we stretch, but like, okay, it's not that much of a stretch. Black does it. Black is king of killing things. It can kill one thing. It can kill all things. I will say that black is more likely, black is the color where I kill all your things, and white is a little more the color that kills everybody's things. That white's a little more balanced. Although obviously it gets to be cheaper, and so white is very good at creature destruction because it has the most efficient form of it. And yes, you destroy your own creatures, but you can build around that. Okay, next up, pacifism. So pacifism is an aura in white that keeps things from attacking or blocking. Sometimes we do like a rest where it also can't use its activated abilities. Normally we do that in white. We did that in green in this set. I'm not sure why. This is another one of the things where, okay, well, who would do this? It's interestingly that it makes more sense in blue, actually, than it makes in green, because blue can sort of lock you down, or blue could overwrite you and make you lose your abilities. So ironically, we should have put this in blue, not in green, but we didn't. And this is one of those things where green really isn't supposed to be doing, like green's answer to creatures should be other creatures, and this contradicts that. So this actually was another... The Planar Chaos probably gave green more breaks than any other color because it gave green more answers. It gave green card drawing and answers to creatures, two things that were supposed to be locked to creatures, and that because of Planar Chaos aren't, and that is a problem. Next up, power toughness changing. Black and red does a bunch of plus X, minus X. Green would occasionally do minus X, plus X, not too much. We did it in blue as sort of this color, this shape shifting thing. Ironically, it is something we on rare occasion do in blue. Like when we're trying to do shape shifting in blue, sometimes we'll do that. Like obviously Morphling did it. So this is something we do a little bit in blue. So this wasn't all that out. Blue, the thing that blue doesn't do that it does here is that blue cannot give other creatures plus N minus N. Because blue's not supposed to be able to kill other creatures. And like Shaper Parasite, let you give target creature plus 2, minus 2, which will let you kill something. And so blue, that part of blue is a little bit of a break that blue shouldn't have done. But blue can do it to itself. We did Punisher effects, and normally Punisher effects are in red. Punisher is, hey opponent, shoot, let me do thing A or thing B, and thing B is, I do damage to you. So do you want to let me do thing A, or do you want to take the damage? We did it in black with loss of life. It flavorfully makes sense in black. It's the kind of thing we don't really need in a second color, and it's a little bit more flavor for red. We sort of like do thing X, or I punch you in the face. And so it's fine in black. It's not that black couldn't do it, but it's more that it makes more sense in red. Raise Dead. Raise Dead is normally a black thing, so put a creature card in the graveyard into your hand. Green can regrowth any card in the graveyard, so we let green do Raise Dead effects. It's not a problem for green to do it. We don't tend to spout out in green. Usually the place you see it nowadays is when we're doing like hybrid type effects in black-green, because it's a subset of something green can do. So it made sense here. It didn't really mess with things too much. Stealing creatures. Normally we do that in blue and red. We did it in black. Black is tertiary in stealing. We do occasionally let black steal. It's one of those things that blue does permanent stealing and red does temporary stealing, and like we don't do enough of it really to be in a third color. But every once in a while, it is flavorful in black. Black is kind of the idea of black taking things. There's some flavor there, so we do it a little bit. And finally, tapping creatures. This is something we normally do in white or blue, although blue often will tap or untap things or tap and freeze things so they don't untap. In this set, we put it in black. It made some flavor sense, sort of like I'm dealing with it. But it's not, because blue and white both tap things, and every once in a blue moon. Well, mostly it's white and blue. We really have no need to put this in black, so it's not a problem in black. Black can kill things, so tapping them is a lot tamer than killing them. So it wasn't a break or anything. So real recap on the effects here. Bounce. We did later on. Bounce would be bounce your own stuff in white. We did do that. Card drawing didn't change. Counter spells, we let white do a little tiny bit, but we haven't done very much with that. Damage prevention, we don't do much anymore. Deflection, we did not move. Dehydration, we did not move. Discard, we did not move. Gating, we did let white. White has done more gating now as a regular thing. Giant growth, we did now let red do some giant growth effects, so they're normally power higher than toughness. Mass destruction, yeah, black can do mass destruction. It can actually do before, it can still do it. It tends to do more like -N, but it can just destroy things. Pacifism still in white. Occasionally we'll do in blue, where we lock things down or change the power or something, but we don't do it in green. Power toughness changing. Blue is allowed to change its own power toughness. It can't change other creatures' power toughness. Punisher really sucks in red. We don't do much in black. And then Raised Dead, we occasionally do in green in hybrid situations. Stealing creatures is tertiary in black, so we do it occasionally, infrequently. Tapping creatures, we really just do in white and in blue. Anyway, I hope this gave you a little sense of sort of what we did, why we did it, and interestingly, hopefully you'll see, a lot of what we played around with did become something we do. There was a lot of testing and playing with Color Pie that would later become actually the reality. But there's a few things. The two biggest breaks in green, in card drawing and in pacifism, are things we don't want to do and really aren't something. So Planar Chaos did a pretty good job of playing in space in which mechanically we could adjust to, and in a lot of cases we did, but there were a few mistakes. And so it is not a great place to strike precedent. If the only place we've ever done it is Planar Chaos, that is not the place to go. See, you can do it. Planar Chaos did it. Although, come to my blog, that happens every week. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoy this. It was interesting for you. But I see my desk, so we all know what that means. This is the end of my drive to work. So instead of talking magic, it's time for me to be making magic. I'll see you guys next time.